We listened to Keir Starmer outline the benefits of the new trade deal that he has negotiated with the EU. Quite clearly, the fishing lobby in Scotland not very happy, but quite clearly a long list of companies, including Scottish salmon producers, who are happy. The riposte, presumably unheard, is that actually many Scots would be happier if we were still in the EU, which seems to be an outcome that no one is willing to consider. We do talk too about the stance taken by the UK, France and Canada to try to push Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel to end the attacks on Gaza, the apparent obliteration of Gaza, and the starvation tactics that are on the go at the moment. And ponder for a while, though it wasn't a top priority for Mr. Joyce, the stitch-up of the Eurovision Song Contest that nearly saw Israel win. Those are the headlines. Now for the podcast.
Hi, chums, and welcome to this week's Lesley Riddick podcast. It's just got a bit of a European cast to it. And we're slightly later in recording today because Sir Keir Starmer stood up in Parliament to make a statement on the latest UK-EU deals across a whole wide range of things, including trade, and to begin with a statement on the Gaza. But I think we will get to Gaza. That's a very definite. But I don't know if you find it interesting listening to Sir Keir Starmer with the sequence in which he detailed the deals reached between the UK and the EU. Did you notice something significant about it, Lesley, about the order of things he talked about?
Well, it was India, US, and then EU. I just thought it was chronological order.
Yeah,
Was there something more?
Well, what he did was he left fishing to the last. He went through every single element of the deals, talking about what he says: security, emissions trading, electricity, borders, law enforcement, e-gates for passports, the youth experience scheme, the steel industry tariffs, the sanitary, phytosanitary deals, Northern Ireland, and then, lo and behold, last, fishing. But Kemi Bagno's response, the first thing she talked about was fishing.
Yeah. Sorry, I am sort of out of sync in the sense that actually the first thing he did was to really try to rub it all home so that, he was building up to his EU statement by sort of basically noising up the opposition and saying, look what we've managed to do. First, it's India, whiskey, apparently distilleries in Scotland can't keep up with the demand that's suddenly raging in from India. I don't know, fact ends. Then it was the United States, car manufacturing safe in our hands. And then, moving on to the EU. And as you say, then that order of kind of the benefits of the best access to the EU outside the EU and EFTA.
Yes.
I've got to say, there's a point where you sort of go, yeah, except that the better access, in a way, as Stephen Flynn put it, was to be in the EU, as Scotland voted for. And it's like everybody's forgotten that. But indeed, the fishing bits of it are last. Now, having a look online, there's been actually an interesting bit in Politicos who are suggesting that the 12-year fishing extension that they've agreed, which was in order to get this sanitary and phytosanitary agreement, which means that almost all checks on food and animal goods moving between the UK and EU would be removed. Right, so that's the deal. But apparently, the expectation was that he only wanted to offer a 4-year extension for fishing rights, but ended up having to triple that to delay an even bigger fuss over this youth mobility deal. So, I mean, essentially, it's just the same thing, which is, whichever premier it's been over a period of 40, 50 years, when there's dealings happening with the EU, what they want is into essentially Scottish waters. What is then offered as trading is precisely that. You've got to say that, however, they had this long list of companies that he trotted out that were just happy Larry that they could now get, his phrase was, no food rotting in lorries sitting. You better hope that there's no delays at Dover or anything. But, that sort of level of delay should be passed. which is fine. And he pointed out seafood. He particularly name checked Scotland there, along with Cornwall, and said this is particularly good news for Scotland because 70% of seafood is sold into the EU, which currently is red tape county. Now, hopefully, that red tape goes. Um, so that will make it makes it on the face of it quite hard for people to sort of make the fuss apart from obviously the sort of wet fish trade, which feels that it's being completely shafted. The thing that's surprising perhaps about all of this is that there was a more in common poll done in the lead up to the deal, which suggests that basically allowing EU members with essentially permanent fishing quotas into British waters. They asked about that. 45% of people said that would be a complete betrayal of Brexit, which is quite a high proportion. And we won't see this today here, but because obviously our papers, the Fleet Street headlines here will be quite different, as they always quite cynically are, from what's pumped out south of the border. But it seems that, although the Times, the Mirror, and the Guardian are all kind of, happy enough, the Brexit backing papers are apparently frothing with rage. It seems we may not see this here. The Sun sees Starmer done up like a kipper. The Express talks about the double whammy of surrender and betrayal. The Telegraph says kiss goodbye to Brexit. And the Star of the famous lettuce progeny mocks Starmer up in a gimp suit. So, there's quite a lot of politics going into this. And of course, we wouldn't even think of it that way because, we're a different country and our politics are different. And there wasn't we're just going back to the Brexit vote. It doesn't look like it's going far enough to most Remain voters in Scotland. Why can't we just be fully back in the EU would be, a front page here, perhaps. And it's completely not what's happening south of the border. So it'll be interesting to see, how that works actually, and whether the fisheries are essentially used by the Brexit supporting majority, maybe still in England, to kind of whack Keir Starmer out of the head with this, whilst he is being quite gung ho.
Well, I mean, I noticed because I listened to the rest of this politics with Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart, and Alistair said he'd been up in Scotland and he'd listened to all these programmes on the way down on the radio, and he said they were talking about a betrayal in terms of fishing, which is the way Rory Stewart put it. But he didn't talk about Scotland at all, despite the fact we're leading about that. Alistair Campbell then talked about it being utilised, as you said, by Farage as a stick to beat the Labour Party with, as a purely political exercise. And he said it was like going back in time. It's a total focus on Farage. And he said you've got to look at the bigger picture. Fishing as an industry is worth about $1 billion. Food and farming, and it's been clearly stated that the removal of checks on food and farming was the quid pro quo for the continued access over a 12-year period, as the way things stood, access to UK waters. Whereas food and farming's worth to a loan to the EU is worth about 10 billion. But what he didn't do is that Scottish vessels, it's worth about $500 million. That's what it's worth in terms of landings, the last figures I could come up with. And when you look at some place like Peterhead, it's 208 million quid a year worth to Peterhead, what's going on there. And to claim it's the status quo, it was meant to be next year, it was going to be annual negotiations over quotas. And I don't know if you noticed that Kemi Badenoch quoted your favourite set of islands, the Faroes, and said we're worse off than the Faroes because they've actually got annual negotiations there. And there was also this thing about the 360 million pounds that was going to go to fishing in coastal areas. And there's about 20 fishing ports in Scotland. So if all the money went to Scotland, it'd be 18 million each. But there are over 120 commercial fishing ports in the UK. So that's about 3 million quid each out of this 360 million. Whoop-de-doo.
Indeed. Well, but the Faroes, it's an interesting one to, for her to mention, because quite clearly the reason that the Faroes are in any position to do negotiating is because whilst they are still part of Denmark, they are
Very
that
much.
hugely devolved. So
Yes.
you could, if only there could be a bit of bullshit, then go back to Ms. Badenoch. You could say, well, all that suggests to you is that far from not being consulted at all, as the Scottish government, that seems to have been the score with
Yep.
it. Actually, if we were following the Faroes example, the Scottish government would simply have decide what it wanted to sign because the Faroes are able to sign international agreements. They're outside the EU whilst Denmark is in. That's how devolved they are. So if you want to walk down that road, Missy, let's have a wee canter. But still, the situation on the Faroes is that their position outside the EU has helped the fishing, which is 92% of their GDP. But it has kind of pretty. I can remember when we were there making the film in 2019 or 18, it did pretty much wreck their food processing, which they ended up having to sort of push into inside the EU to the mainland of Denmark and other places. So there will be, it sounds like, a bit of a swings and roundabouts between the seafood, who also produce a fair whack, and essentially the fishing industry. But that's a deal and that's a balance that Scotland as an independent country would have taken, would have balanced that out. If you're looking at the impact of fishing to the whole of Britain, it's much less than it is to the economy of Scotland. And
Absolutely.
the fact Starmer could name check. And did you notice the little roar of approval when he mentioned Scottish salmon? We're also
Yes.
hot and bothered about
Yes.
this. Thanks, Tavish Scott, who heads that up these days. That was obviously seen as a scalp. The way they're looking at this now is anything that kind of sticks one to the SNP. Hey, look, there's a big industry in your own patch who are actually, sort of giving us big licks for all of this. The better that works, for Keir Starmer. So yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff kind of bound up in that. But I mean, I think Stephen Flynn was probably right in saying, on the one hand, it's neither a huge betrayal, and I
Yeah.
mean, weirdly, the SNP seem to be sitting beside the blinking reform people when they bother to turn up, and I think the point was made quite nippily that basically Farage wasn't even there, but still, as usual, right? But anyway, it's neither a huge betrayal, as all the kind of Fleet Street lot are saying, but neither is it the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I think he should. I wish he would have just taken that to its logical conclusion and just said, obviously the greatest access we've ever had was when we were in the EU. But to be fair to him, he's an Aberdeen MP, soon to be MSP, I guess. And he basically used the punchline to say, you've done a deal that allows more carbon
Yeah.
storage to happen here. When are you going to fund the Acorn project? Well, nice try, but you will kind of hell will freeze over before Starmer even accidentally gives a bonus ball to the Acorn project. Although the response that Starmer did give, if I was someone associated with that project, I would actually be fairly hot under the collar listening to the patronising crap, basically, that came from Starmer that, yeah, you little guys, yeah, carbon capture could really help you guys create jobs. Well, do you think? Do you
Yeah.
think? Now, just sub point, carbon capture. We've gone into this before, right?
Yes.
But nonetheless, there you are. So, as ever, a mixed blinking bag. And I don't know if you noticed, but last night there was an interesting little meeting actually of the Labour backbenchers and MPs and whatnot. And it was a reception on Fleet Street or whatever. It seems that Starmer got quite a kind of pummeling at that one. And interestingly, somebody in The Guardian had got the inside track. 24 questions asked of Starmer, all of them hostile, and lots of pummeling going on about a reversal of the winter fuel payment, which apparently there's been little noises coming from Rachel Reeves about sort of maybe they've got the cutoff point a little bit wrong on that one, that they might be, willing to look at that a little bit. And apparently also there was a lot of questions basically saying that Island of Strangers stuff, no,
Yeah.
no, 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 that language, no. And a couple of comments from Starmer that seemed to suggest he got the message. So, So here we are. This is Starmer's big day. He's got that long list of companies. He's got, three trade deals that the Tories, to be fair, didn't get. He's thinking this is kind of looking, optimistic. There's a couple of papers on his side. It's a sort of growth narrative that he can probably work at. And yet, just pick that back a little bit. And his own guys are still raging about a lot of the stuff that he just, this will not probably o'erleap the existing attitude that this is just a nasty party that really hasn't done anything that connects with the ordinary voter except take their winter fuel up allowance away.
Well, I don't know if you noticed just beforehand, it was the Treasury questions, and Brian Leishman got stuck into Rachel Reeves about the cuts to disability benefits, etc. And she turned around and just gave a list of things that the Labour Party was doing brilliantly, and fundamentally telling Brian Leishman to, and not so diplomatic, to sit down and be quiet and stop moaning because they were doing the things that a Labour government does do and sticking to Labour principles. So you just, and again, it just go back to wonder how long Starmer's and his government's policies, let alone the rhetoric, will be tolerated by the backbenchers and by the members.
And
But
I wonder for the public as well, because I mean,
yeah,
his whole thing started with him saying, the opposition have just got tired arguments about the past. That'll be a kind of tired argument that we actually were a lot better off when we're in the EU. But, it depends. I
well, they
think
admitted
maybe,
that themselves, Lesley. They put up the figures saying that
yeah.
the 20 billion lost in exports and 7 billion lost in imports.
Yeah, but it needed somebody to kind of capitalize on it that way. I mean, I didn't listen through, I mean, God Almighty, the stuff we do for you guys to hear Ed Davey, right?
Oh, God,
But,
yeah.
I don't know if the where the Lib Dems are these days, but it needs somebody to just whack straight in on that unmitigated with no other little kind of hingy-onny point at the end of it. The other point he's making, and I suspect this is what he's trying to kind of angle this at, is that Britain is back on the world stage. Well,
Yes.
thank God for that. And perhaps that's, this is always the stage that people take to when things are getting a bit sticky domestically. But, so let's see. Maybe the public will go, well, okay, actually, Brexit didn't really work out. Still feel we want to take back control, but, maybe they'll buy this line that we've now got the best of both worlds. We shall wait and see.
Yeah, but I mean, he did begin with a statement on Gaza after the meeting with Macron and Carney, saying it was utterly intolerable. He was horrified by the escalation, talking about the slaughter of innocent women and children, demand for a ceasefire, the opposition to settlements, what Israel was doing in terms of the stopping of aid getting in was totally inadequate and unacceptable. The scale up of humanitarian assistance had to be massive, and the foreign secretary would be coming to the House to make a statement, and I don't know when that will be. But I mean, it does seem to be that there is you know, it's gone. We're no ceasefire, release the hostages, and we're now taking all this time to get to the point for the Labour government to actually realise that what's going on in Gaza is absolutely horrifying. And it was a really odd one, Leslie, because it came hard on the clandestine, as it's been described, meeting at the British Museum, hosted by Jimmy Carr, and to which was attended by Maria Eagles, who's UK Minister for Defence Procurement and Spending, where she actually gave wholehearted support when she said that Israel had gone through the most terrible of times in the last 17, 18 months, and lauded the RAF's in reconnaissance and assistance that they've been giving to Israel. And it was hosted by Zippy Hotevli, the Israeli uh, ambassador to the UK, who is fiercely opposed to a two-state solution and said that the Nakba was an Arab lie. And that came hard on the heels of exactly the same time the Labour government was up in court, defending a position saying that it had been supplying, despite its sanctions, the claim was that it had been supplying F-35 fighter jet parts, which were going into a pool and then finishing up with in Israel, saying that there was no evidence that the Israelis, even though they were breaking international law on humanitarian grounds, there was no evidence they were committing genocide, no evidence that they were targeting civilians. In fact, the claim was that but the UK Labour government put up was that in fact that they were taking steps in the report that they put to the court. They were taking steps to avoid harming civilians. So you've got that going at the same time. So you just wonder how much faith we can actually place in anything that Starmer says, despite this latest statement, when you've got just last Monday, Maria Eagles attending this event, the RAF engaged in reconnaissance, and the UK Labour government defending itself against the accusations of engaging in helping to engage in genocide and making these declarations about the innocence of Israel and all these actions they're carrying out.
And just by the by, I mean, the National covered a very good story. I think it was the Campaign Against the Arms Trade that did the freedom of information requests, but
Yeah,
that basically Labour licensed more military equipment to be exported to Israel in 3 months than the Tories did for 3 years,
yeah,
which is gobsmacking. And, nobody seems to be arguing with the figures. They're just brushing it all under the carpet. But, you can go through the figures. We'll put the link up, just have a look at it. But it is quite astonishing. So at the same time, now we've got I'm sorry, but like crocodile tears coming from Starmer, particularly about the appalling nature of what's happening. How do you think it would be read in Israel if a new government that's supposed to be a left of centre humanitarian leaning kind of set of people who, let's remember, cancelled foreign aid in order to basically
yeah.
produce more defence spending here. So you could look at it and think, yeah, these guys, do they really walk the walk? Probably not. And then you notice that they've actually whacked up the amount of military equipment they're sending to you in Israel in just 3 months after they are elected. And you'd think to yourself, I think these guys are pussies. I think that we in Israel can do what the hell we like because these guys are talking one thing and walking in completely the opposite direction, which might well explain. It's only a small thing. I quite realise that. And it's okay. It's good that France, Canada, and the United Kingdom have now said they're really, really not pleased about all this. But obviously, it's when Donald Trump weighs in, he's the one that can make this change. And who knows where he is with any of this as he, globe trots dealing with who knows how many different problems. Well, not problems, mostly manufactured situations that he has inserted himself into. So it's grim. And yet, it's like the civil population is still sort of doing its thing, because I mean, I'm sure people will have noticed that the dear old co-op
Yeah.
basically has come out with the membership have voted. Whether or not the business goes on to enact this is another question, but the members have voted to not stock, to basically boycott Israeli goods, which is kind of quite a step up. And it follows logically from a decision that they'd taken to boycott Russian goods after the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. So it seems 73% of the membership want the board to demonstrate moral courage and leadership by removing Israeli goods from the store shelves. So let's see what happens. The board is saying it will consider the thoughts of members expressed by the non-binding vote. Now, so it's maybe unfortunate for the co-op that they've got, the sort of cooperative structure they do, because if you're then going to ignore 75% of your members, I think you probably find quite a lot of people boycotting you. So now that you've got this far, it strikes me, you need to move forward with that.
Yeah, but talking about boycotts and popular opinion, oh, according to the Israeli state and someone like Danny Ehrlich, the Israeli ambassador to Ireland, we've got it all wrong, us chattering classes. The people are very pro-Israel, and that was absolutely demonstrated by the fact of the way they came roaring out the rails from 14th position after the professional judges, right up to nearly snatched the winning in the Eurovision Song Contest. I mean, we've got it all wrong, Lesley. The people of Europe are pro-Israel. And that vote for, what's her name? I mean, I didn't even watch the.
Yuval Raphael.
Yeah, that vote for her symbolizes the reality of the public, not what the chattering classes have been saying. And that just goes to the heart of what Eurovision, and it's an example of performative performative progressivism. That's it. It looks
What
great
is that anyway? Now that
oh
you
yeah,
said it.
performative progressivism is it's like UEFA, and the inclusion policies where everyone feels welcome. You can participate regardless of ability, age, belief, ethnic origin, gender, or sexual
Right.
orientation.
This is seriously, it was fixed. It really
Yes,
was. Okay, and let's not dignify it with anything else here. I mean, obviously, as ever, Pat, we've had this discussion before. You would have been a million miles away from the TV whilst the actual thing was
yes,
playing.
absolutely.
Right? So
Well, I
fair
was in the
enough.
pub.
Well, I was as ever watching it with a pal, with whatever our alcohol-free lager and everything. And yeah, it was quite extraordinary. I mean, to be honest, the songs are pretty rubbish, I thought,
Yeah,
generally speaking. So there we were. There's a young chap whose name I forget now from Austria who had the most extraordinary voice. I mean, he's a tenor, he can jump into soprano, which is gobsmacking just as an actual, you're witnessing this voice coming from a male human being is amazing. So anyway, he was the one that was top, with all the juries and everything, with a couple of others just chasing him. Israel kind of nowhere. And then suddenly, when it was the second part of the vote after the professional juries, it was the public horsed in. Suddenly, wow, this massive public vote came in, and Israel was top with just the possibility that Austria could catch them. And I've got to say, I mean, if you're sitting and watching this and watching on Twitter and Blue Sky and stuff, the levels of panic going on around the place. The idea, in fact, then people were saying, do you know, this is what needs to happen. Israel do need to win this to basically end Eurovision and to kind of give a really strong message to the Eurovision Song Contest organizer people that, this is what happens for you just having let Israel come in, despite, just like the co-op thing before,
yeah.
Russia being automatically banned. But this is what they will do. Now, what they did do, very good piece in the National by Steph Payton, who's obviously kind of keen a Eurovision fan as well, and this is what began to circulate on social media, that basically people were coming online and saying, thank God I kept all my credit cards from
Yeah.
different countries. I've voted 20 times, and you're allowed to vote up to 20 times. So that was happening. Steph Payton observes that Israel had hired giant digital billboards in New York's Times Square. Right, now you might think, just a minute, I know Australia and Israel are not in Europe, but they are in the Eurovision Song Contest. But what? The States? But see, to vote, you could just be a punter. You didn't need to be in any of the participatory countries, right? They also took out huge amounts of YouTube ads targeting individual countries with personal messages from the singer. And always at the bottom of all the ads, a big reminder that you could vote 20 times. So this, it seems a kind of hell of a coincidence that we should get this sort of suddenly massive hit. And the other thing that he points out is that in the run up to the contest, there was 10 of the most streamed songs because they're
Yes.
all on everything beforehand. And basically, Israel didn't even get there. So it has suddenly gone from being with the same public, being kind of, don't think so, a pretty middling pop song that barely registered in the charts. Wow, on the night, suddenly everybody motivated to get out and genuinely vote for it. Also, as last year, there was people posting the audience of boos for
Yes.
Raphael when she turned up. And of course, what the viewer heard were therefore manufactured cheers. So where does that leave this? I mean, I've got to say now, that's it. I'm not watching this anymore. If Israel is participating and we're still in the same situation next year, no. And of course, the added aspect to it is that at the same time as all this whitewash was going on, basically in the Eurovision, Palestinians were having one of the deadliest periods they've ever had. Well, and that's really saying something with the starvation, with more every day, another 100 people killed, more families killed, the wee bairns that we've watched, if you keep watching Channel 4 News, starving, and dying. So that's the reality backdrop of what's going on while we have this connivance by the European Broadcasting Union that hosts Eurovision, this connivance with Israel coming in and basically manipulating the contest. So there's got to be something happens next year, because I think that's it now for a lot of people. There's no point bothering with this, because what's been highlighted is just exactly, this is not fun. This is not doesn't feel good at all anymore. And clearly Israel will just keep going till they win. And when they win, they will end Eurovision. And you won't care. And fair play, quite a lot of people won't. But, that just is another triumph for them, basically, in manufacturing the narrative that sees them through so much of this.
And it's the complicity, Lesley, of people like the European Broadcasting Union, not only letting them in, but I mean, I don't know if you saw I mean, it's a minor thing, I suppose, in comparison to the slaughter that's going on. But the EBU bosses about the jeers being replaced by cheers said the Swiss host broadcaster was simply using standard audio sweetening to create a consistent soundscape for the TV audience. It was used equally and identically for all acts. And the EBU, and the reason I mention UEFA when, and I was in the pub. I was in the pub after Dundee United securing fourth place after a great second half, where we came back and beat Aberdeen, secure fourth place and get guaranteed entry at some stage into European competition next year. And I went and had a look at who our potential opponents could be. And lo and behold, within the group of opponents that we can have, Maccabi Tel Aviv. And I thought to myself, that just struck right home to me, because Eurovision, I don't give a damn about. But to actually think about the fact that Dundee United could be drawn against the team from Israel whilst this is going on in Palestine appalled me. And Maccabi Tel Aviv, if you remember, were the fans that came over to the Netherlands and created havoc, and they were racist, and they were rioting, and remember that whole whitewash that took place there, and we could be drawn against them. And I thought to myself, no, I would boycott the game. I wouldn't go to the game. But I was considering go to the game, take a Palestinian flag, smuggle it in, wave the flag. That's the other potential. But I mean, it is that whole thing of these liberal institutions. UEFA, which talks about equality and wearing rainbow laces and playing with rainbow footballs. And Eurovision giving that all-inclusive, come one, come all ye, for anyone, for everyone. That is the illusion of progressivism that these institutions create. But when it comes to the sticking point, they're on the side of a genocidal nation. And they were quite happy to get rid of Russia out of all these competitions, but allow Israel in. And it's that point where, when it means something to you, will you be willing to stand up? And I would boycott if we didn't. And I would pray that with a whole thousands of United fans would do something if we were drawn against Maccabi Tel Aviv to actually signify our disgust. But you never
But,
know.
but whether it gets covered, then, because actually 72 former Eurovision
Yeah.
Song Contest contestants signed an open letter before this calling for Israel and its broadcaster to be banned. And I mean, that hardly saw the light of day, basically. And in fact, in the coverage afterwards, the really pretty crap British song, I can't even remember, what was it? What the hell happened last night? Ooh, so risque to say hell in the midst of it all. But anyway, um, I was kind of listening to a Radio Scotland commentary on it, and they had trailed that they were going to indeed what the hell happened last night. And I thought, good, somebody that's going to actually dig into some. No. How you could actually have watched all of that, which it sounded like the presenter had, and just be totally unwilling to open up that can of worms, which was the only thing everyone was talking about. What the hell happened last night? How did the Israelis nearly win Eurovision with a middling song? And once again get the biggest vote for British people. So it's kind of, the attempts people are making now to sort of push back against this get very little coverage, compared to and just, it's extraordinary how much maybe broadcasters think, it's just a load of nonsense, the Eurovision Song Contest. In the light of the big stuff that's going on, really, are we going to sort of potentially get complaints from Israel and all sorts of people by even opening this up and questioning whether or not they're manipulating the thing? Yeah, right. Well, everybody who watched that thing, and I would think the majority of them, it's a very camp, gay, inclusive, sort of upbeat thing. I'll bet you the vast majority of them from Britain are fairly naturally on the Palestinian side.
Absolutely.
So you just earn no credibility at all by deciding to ask why Britain came 19th. Was that really the big story of the night? No, it absolutely wasn't. And I've seen as well attempts by newspapers to try and explain why the European Broadcasting Union is a little bit sort of conflicted in this, because the broadcaster KAN, which is the state broadcaster from in Israel, is apparently, I've seen it argued, under huge pressure from the Israeli government and essentially censorship pressure. So it's the European Broadcasting Union which sees a member in Israel under threat and is trying to keep a lifeline to them by saying they can still participate in what is, after all, the broadcasting union event as well as a Eurovision. I'm sorry, that completely doesn't wash. I mean, that doesn't wash at all. And when you start seeing really quite mainstream, websites and newspapers are actually reporting in 23, a reporter from that network, Can, was filmed joking with Israeli soldiers who appeared to be writing a message for Gaza on the side of a tank shell. So, okay, we can all do the whataboutery and all the rest of it, but this is just kind of fairly clear now. There has to be something done about this before next year, or I think everybody I can imagine will just boycott this.
But we asked why broadcasters won't speak up, Lesley. Well, Sangeeta Miska at LBC, she was taken off air like that. And it was all, wasn't nothing could do with her statements on questioning Israeli spokespersons. It's all to do with listening figures. They brought in Vanessa Feltz, and the listening figures are down, but Vanessa's still there. And look what's happened to Gary Lineker, who has been an outspoken voice in support right across the board, right back to us. This is the sort of thing you would have heard in Nazi Germany, talking about remarks that were made by the previous Conservative government about immigration, and then subsequently his very principled moral stance on Gaza. Now, he did actually retweet something that included an anti-Semitic image and immediately took it down. Immediately took it down. And it's been headlined in the BBC as the sorry end of Gary Lineker. No, I think Gary Lineker can hold his head up high, and walk out of there. And he is regarded as a national treasure, because of his appearances on Match of the Day, which is a programme I never watch because I'm not the slightest bit in English football. But the man is a decent human being who's had the absolute guts to stand up, and he's been released, he's been removed, he's away from the BBC. It's not going to affect him. He's in a specific position because he's a sharp businessman and he's created all these podcast platforms such as GoHang that are doing extremely well. But he has used that position to speak out. But what would happen to the person who's got a mortgage, who's got a family, who's got kids to support? Dare they speak up when they see what happened to somebody like Sangeeta Miska and see what's happened to somebody like Gary Lineker? I understand why people are silent. It must take a lot of guts to be in that position to speak up.
And actually, although, as you know, I have even less interest in English football than you do,
Yes.
but I kind of also thought, reading Gary Lineker's statements about this, there's a lot of dignity in his stance. He was completely fulsomely sorry where he was sorry. But the other thing that was really quite strong, I don't know if he just got his jars or whether he just decided, something, I'm not arguing this anymore. It's already scheduled that I'll be out of here. And actually, I'm not having this firefighting going on a regular basis. I'm just leaving. And as somebody who did also leave the BBC, you do get to a stage where people within that get so hung up that there's almost no world outside the Beeb. As you quite rightly say, Lineker has been cute in that, he's got,
Oh, yeah.
branches almost everywhere already. But still, the impulse to try to hang on for dear life to cover one more World Cup, one more season, whatever.
Yeah.
He's just leaving. Well, totally right decision. Just get out while the going's good. And just as you say, I don't think anybody thinks this is like a broken man. Not at all.
No, no. All right. Well, moving on to matters domestic. You seem to have set a few hairs coursing with your recent article on the public consultation that Scotland futures. Now, I thought, and they very cute, they think, with Scott and then a capital L before the land, Scotland Futures, which is led by the Scottish Land Commission, which was set up by the Scottish Government after the Land Reform Act in 2017. And they're wholly funded by the Scottish Government. And they're dedicated to making the most of Scotland's land by stimulating fresh thinking, supporting change on the ground, making recommendations to Scottish ministers where appropriate for legislative and policy change across our three priority areas of work: reforming land rights, embedding responsible land ownership and use, and reforming land markets. So over to you, Lesley. This public consultation, uh, is it a consultation or is it an abrogation of responsibility by Scottish Land Commission?
Well, just to say, the Scottish Land Commission has actually done some very good research over the years on all sorts of things, from land taxes to all sorts of different ways to be handling land. It seems to me it kind of is now stuck in what is a classic Scottish government sort of mode, which is you've done all the research. I certainly felt this when we did Nordic Horizons and ponied people in from other countries to say, oh, look, here's how they run things better. There's how these people run things better. And everybody went, God, that is interesting, and did nothing. Now, I'm not saying the Scottish Land Commission did nothing because they can't do anything. They can only recommend to the Scottish Government stuff that it could do. However, it's sitting with a bank of research, which, it can actually, I feel, it could just take a deep breath and recommend a whole package of stuff because it's done the blinking research. So just deliver it. This fairly innocent looking call by Mike Russell, who is, former MSP
Hmm.
minister of practically everything at some point. Anyway, Mike had kind of done a little piece just saying to people, look, we want to know what you think. Please let us know what would effective land reform, a fully reformed land system look like. Right at that point, I just thought, no more blooming consultations that are, why? Why? You know, if the Scottish SNP have been in control for 17 years, right? You don't need the public to tell you anything. Just get on with it. And the column, which did start off, maybe I'm getting old, maybe I've been round the houses too often, maybe I'm a misery magnet, maybe my shonky memory is to blame, maybe I have unrealistic ideas of what can be achieved in a quarter of a century, all of that. But, this is kind of crazy. There's a list of things that have already been subscribed to by the SNP that just haven't been done. And, a compulsory sale order, right? Going, oh God, that sounds so boring. What that means is if there's dereliction around the place, derelict land or buildings, instead of a council having to do a compulsory purchase order, which takes that crappy old stuff onto its books, which it needs like a blooming hole on the head, a compulsory sale order would allow basically order the sale of such, land or buildings to a third party. Ideal, because it doesn't mean the councils end up having to, clog up the works by taking the stuff onto their books. Now, everyone was agreed that was a good idea, and it's been promised since about 2016. Well, where is it? It keeps being just, oh God, just didn't, quite. A succession act. I mean, every event I go to, I have to sort of point out that we are probably practically we must be the only people in the developed world where children do not have equal rights to inherit land. Yes, equal to inherit property, but not land, which means large farms and estates pass quite legally to just one offspring. Who cares? What it means is that other siblings are kind of left with next to nothing. It's usually the daughters. And it means that large chunks of Scotland, up to 1% of the landmass, still remain subject to the whims and outlooks of one person, usually a very wealthy man, which is why blinking Napoleon got in
Yes.
on it in 1801. And his Napoleonic Code established the right to equally inherit land across all the places he invaded, basically across Europe. Happy days for those guys that were invaded because they got that equal right to inherit land that broke up large estates. I hear when I mention this, people saying, "Oh, but you get some places where there's far too small an area of land." Well, I think I'd rather have that problem than what we've got at the moment, to be honest. And over the peace, those countries seem to have done not too badly, and we haven't done it. It's been promised, 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 and it hasn't been done. So anyway, there's a long list. We'll put the link up, of things that could just basically be done right now. You could also tackle the fact that these large sporting estates pay no business rates because somehow they qualify for small business exemptions, right? I would put two whole lawyers onto just closing that loophole and letting everybody know you're doing it because land reform is very popular. There's loads of bits here that could be done. You don't need to ask anybody more about it because it's like asking me details about the innards of even actually the electric bike that I cycle. I mean, I just have to keep hoping nothing goes wrong because I'm not that good at doing anything except putting the chain back on. When it comes to the innards, I know I like that bike. I know it's dead useful. I know it's a fantastic way of getting about. That's what I know about it. I don't know anything about the cogs, wheels, and whistles. I imagine the public is the same. It simply wants to have a situation where we are not a laughing stock around the world, if anyone even pays attention, because we have allowed feudalism to riddle through this country and have done nothing substantial about it, except for those communities that have been bold enough to buy themselves out and to try to use shonky bits of legislation that are hardly fit for purpose. So that's my thing, right? So it basically is just come on. I mean, indeed, as I say, quote Tom Johnson, the great Labour wartime Scottish secretary who really did quite a lot. And this is the point. There's been big moments in the past. There was the taxation, I can't remember which, it was Lloyd George budget, which had prompted 1/5 of Scottish land to go onto the market. Such was the impact. Now, I'll grant you, Scottish Parliament possibly doesn't have the same control as a British Prime Minister. However, Tom Johnson's hydroelectric revolution basically forced land onto the market and created energy potential for most of the Highlands and the whole of the UK. And an important thing that Tom Johnson said, so long as half a dozen families own one half of Scotland, so long will countless families own none of it. Right, that was 80 years ago. Come on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm looking forward to the fact that I think you're planning on getting a podcast special with Mike Russell, I believe, and it'd be interesting to see him. Just the question I would like to ask him is that if you get individuals, community groups, land managers, businesses, and organisations together, can they help shape a shared vision on how Scotland's land is owned, used, and managed in the years ahead? Because that's Scotland Futures is stated there. And, you know, is land reform, Mike says land reform is not just for land reformers. And the conversation can feel remote, discussed in policy circles or historic terms. And from somebody like you who comes from a background of Highland clearances, and I come from a background in Arran when my family were cleared off the land, sorry, talking about things in historic terms is really, really important.
Well, it is. But I mean, if you want, I can talk in very present terms. I'm working on a column that will have to get very heavily legaled because it will probably land me in a lot of difficulty about evictions that are happening right beside me now. So, and I'm constantly being contacted by people who are struggling with problems now, like the people on the south of Skye and Slate, the community council there, who suddenly hear that the Clandonald Trust is planning to sell the ancestral lands with almost no time given to them to organise a buyout. Not sure if they even want to buy the whole estate. Suddenly stuck onto the back foot. That's happening now. That's not ancient history. All the stuff that's happening is happening now. You can even forget the ancient history. But so many people are scared to speak up about the kind of sort of sharp practice that's going on the land in lots of large landed estates where people, just like the old days, are the employer, the landlord, the landowner. Okay, now they probably don't run the local council, but that's the only thing that's changed. But anyway, yes, the
Yeah.
Land Commission communications and engagement manager has been in touch with me, having heard the last or read the article, and saying basically that yes, they appreciated the piece, which captured the frustrations and hopes around land reform with real clarity. I think, okay. So anyway, she says you raised some important questions about ambition, the pace of progress, and what real change might look like. So we wondered if you'd be open to having Mike Russell on your podcast to discuss the intent. Right. So of course, fine, let's do that. The only thing that it strikes me about all of this is, if you have put yet another bit of publicity out saying that you're calling on the public to show that they care about the future of land by participating in a consultation, which for me anyway would be about, I don't know, the 700th consultation about any of this stuff. Now, I exaggerate for effect, but still, and they don't do it. What would you draw from that? What will the folk who just say, this is just a couple of ranty people, hello, I'm one of them, who, if there was a kind of milk lorry crash and I just happened to be in the middle of it all, that would be the end of it, right? So, it's dangerous to be suggesting that if people are kind of hot and bothered about something, they will naturally queue up to do a government consultation, which, when you look at it, has got two questions that kind of, I don't know, they don't lead me to get things off my chest. So I worry about that as a method of trying to stoke anything up. I wonder, to give Mike the benefit of the doubt, because he isn't daft, if this mechanism is something that's perhaps decided to try to kind of force land reform up the agenda, so that, if there's something that Mike can use to rattle the cage and say, look, everybody says this isn't enough. Come on, you BAMs in your manifestos, get going on it. Let's get some. But here's the rub again, to be doing a consultation with the public to say what would really vigorous land reform look like, while you've got a land reform bill working its way through Parliament now. What does that say about that bill? It says that that everyone is conscious that it isn't going to do the business. Now, I know everyone will say, "Oh, but it's slow and it takes time, and we have to have lots of things." And the Honourable Andy Whiteman is on record as saying we'll need a land reform bill a year practically to get stuff sorted and work through all the details. So, okay, there's that in it. But I don't know, if you don't even see the irony of it, that you're asking people to visualize an end game in this, whilst at the same time the party you are part of and the government is proposing a land reform bit of legislation that so many people have just gone, I just give up now, because this is going to make, once again, almost hee-haw difference, despite being described as a Mugabe-style land grab by those on the other side. So anyway, Mike, if you're listening, since you are listening, there you go. If you still fancy coming on, that's grand.
Yeah, well, the Mugabe style land grab was precisely what was going through my head about the ability to create a shared vision, Anyway, however, I'm talking about bills going through Parliament, and the Assisted Dying Scotland bill passed through the stage one last week, and I think it was last Tuesday evening, because we spoke about its potential of getting passed. And Andrew Tickell's written a very nuanced and thoughtful article, I think, in the National concerning it, and about the way things are going to have to be done in order to maintain the support that the bill got at stage one. And I was particularly interested because I watched Debate Night from St Andrews, and Jamie Green, who's now the Liberal Democrat MSP, who said he voted for the bill to go past stage one, was now very, very concerned and was wanting to listen to the arguments about why he should continue to support the bill as it went through past the committee stage.
Yes, I mean I mean, obviously, let's not rehearse. Everyone's heard the arguments on both
Yeah.
sides so much, so we're not talking about that. It's just how this manages to work its way through Parliament. The day that we recorded the podcast last week, Tuesday, it was 7 o'clock the vote, and it was 70 to 56 to progress, which surprised everyone, I think, including Liam MacArthur, the Lib Dem from Orkney, who kind of almost slumped in his chair with relief, actually, that they got it through. It does look in the background that there have been years of work gone into that to get it to the stage that it's at the moment. So, that's something. But that's basically backing the principle of the vote and obviously some of the detail. And there's been quite a lot of parliamentary stages in this because unlike the British bill, the bill in the English Parliament, whatever you want to call it, but in Westminster, which pertains to England, and I think maybe England and Wales, maybe even Northern Ireland, I don't know. Anyway, that one was brought in as a private member's bill, really in an inadequate way to deal with something this complicated. And it's now running into really massive opposition because there just isn't enough time to hear. They had something like, I think, 5 or 6 amendments before them last Friday. They dealt with one. So lots of people are beginning to feel panicky about it, that there's just not enough time to do it this way. But that is what has been essentially left to the proponent there, Kim Leadbeater. That's the only way that she could manage to progress that bill. Scottish, this one has been done differently so that all the parliament, the scrutiny has really begun very much before it got to the stage of these votes. So, however, what we've got now is where you can possibly go with something that will never be complete, will never be utterly watertight. There's people arguing. There's a reader in law at University of Strathclyde who's told the Herald that MSPs face a massive mammoth task to address the serious issues. She says the bill is riddled with problems, unfixable problems, concerns about eligibility, the definition of terminal illness, the complexity of assessing capacity and coercion, and whether it's even competent for the Scottish Parliament because there will be poisons, essentially drugs used which could be classified poisons, which is a reserved matter. It might need a Section 30 order to come from Westminster to go through with it. And as we know, John Swinney, who would have to ask for it, is opposed to the bill. But then you've got the other side of it, which Andrew Tickell puts really well in the column that he's written in the National, which is really sort of describing what I've just gone through there. A lot of this is bad faith politics. And that, of course, there are answers to quite a lot of, of the worries there are. They have been gone through, tested. There have been some changes, and that he thinks it's probably true that the majority of people that in the public still feel the same, which is that if people are absolutely in agony at the end of their lives and not able to recover, they should find a way to be able to end their lives with dignity and on their terms, rather than waiting to see if a doctor in charge of them puts a do not resuscitate notice on them. Now, that this is going to be a big emotive point and debate from here on in, and still a massive challenge actually for Liam MacArthur's team to keep the health committee on board, to keep all the people like Jamie Green that you mentioned, because it's now becoming a bit sort of in vogue to say, well, actually, I voted simply to get this thing over the line, so that we could continue discussing it, but I'm not sure about it. I think the public wants you to be a bit braver than that and to just decide on what is workable legislation on the grounds that it's worked across the world, and not to kind of just fall out now, because you can always get what Andrew Tickell is describing as a technical knockout.
Yeah.
And you can get agreement on this from you can use the Scotland Act. He sees this as kind of quite possible, albeit very delicate.
Yeah, I mean, the delicacy as well. I mean, I thought what was interesting about it, because it's now gone to the committee stage for line by line scrutiny. And other than, I think, the convener of the committee, all the 9 other MSPs voted in favour of the bill. And he was actually saying, look, you're going to have to find a way to assure MSPs and the public the decks aren't being stacked. because of the way the committee is structured. And he does go backwards and forwards about this. But I think it was particularly pertinent that what you said about the technical knockouts, the ability at every stage of the process for what appears to be the popular will and the will of the Parliament to be thwarted through technicalities and continually placing barriers in the way. And I mean, it is and I do understand. I mean, it did actually show when I saw the debate. It did actually, as people have said, show the Scottish Parliament up in the best of lights, where it was thoughtful and there were impassioned speeches on both sides. But I think if there is a settled will for this to happen with the public, it is they should be honour bound to go through it and act in goodwill in order to make it happen.
Yeah, and I mean, Andrew sort of concludes the thing saying, we've consistently seen political losers in Holyrood turn to the law as the
Yeah.
best way of wrestling back control over the public agenda. So, okay, that's not to say there aren't legal problems that are significant and so on, but I think people will be quite unforgiving, given that this is about the third attempt to do this, and that each time there's about 5 or 10 years between each attempt. So that's another 10 years of this. That's one of the things you're voting for. And in that the result was quite, more support for Liam McCarthy's bill than I think he'd expected even. That seems many commentators think that is simply because the post bag to MSPs has been full of the stories of the kind of situations and in fact, some incredible speeches from the House in the House itself, from people who had experienced really terrible deaths. So anyway, I know there's a lot of other points that could be put the other way, and those two have been put powerfully. But let's not just haver on some technical detail. Try to get through this as far as you can, because that's 10 years. It's going to wait for another attempt.
Yeah. And talking about being forgiven, Lesley, I mean, old Canon McKerney of St Mary's Lochee would never forgive me if he was still alive for forgetting to mention the election of the new Pope last week. I mean, there was so much to cover. And it's quite funny when I think about the election of Pope Leo. When the news came up that the white smoke had been issued, I immediately switched television on and saw on Twitter. I switched the TV on and sat avidly glued to the whole process to find out who the Pope was. Because I mean, I don't know if it's like the Jesuits said, give me the boy and I'll give you the man, you know. But so I'm still culturally Catholic, and I was surprisingly moved by the whole thing when they said the Hail Mary as well. So, and it was a moving experience, but I was on tenterhooks. I was really worried just to see who would be elected, and funnily enough, to see what name would be selected. And because Pope Francis, I mean, that was a deliberate choice that actually emphasized the service to the poor and poverty and working for the weak and working for those who are excluded from society, as St. Francis of Assisi did. And the selection of the name of Pope Leo was incredibly significant because Pope Leo XIII wrote the definitive at that point document on the reaction of the Catholic Church was in the document called Rerum Novarum, which is an encyclical that went out to all the parishes in the world about the nature of laissez-faire capitalism, the rise of socialism and communism, and what the Catholic Church's response should be about this. So contained within that was the recognition that a fair day's work for a fair day's pay, absolutely essential. That workers should have the right to organise themselves in trade unions for collective bargaining, and that the first role of any government should be the welfare of their citizens, in particular the poor and the excluded. But again, being the Catholic Church, it is open to interpretation on both sides, because what it does, it was an attack on laissez-faire capitalism, but simultaneously it rejected socialism because it was too much state intervention in the life of the individual. But paradoxically, it called for, and this is the duality of the Catholic Church in many ways on many matters, it said that the state had an absolute The state had to get involved in the lives of individuals to protect the poor and protect the excluded, to relieve them from the immiseration that laissez-faire capitalism was introducing in through the Industrial Revolution. So the choice of the name was absolutely remarkable. The Pope Leo himself has an incredible track record of service in Peru as a missionary with the Augustinians and working with the poor, working with migrants. So I think it's an interesting choice. And people have looked back and people have said, oh, it wasn't a political choice, but it was a political choice because he's been outspoken on social issues such as the poor, such as migrants, and has been let's put it this way, it's slagged off people like J.D. Vance for example, ranking a hierarchy of those whom we should care for, starting off with your family and then moving outwards from that, to which Pope Leo said, no, love is for everyone. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. It'll be interesting the stances he takes. It'll be interesting to see how progressive he will be in other matters such as women's rights. But also to finish with, it's the fact is that Pope Leo is being described as a moderate. And that just shows how far the window has shifted within the Catholic Church, that someone is now described as a moderate who takes left of centre positions on things such as poverty and migration and workers' rights, is now a centrist in the Catholic Church.
Right. Well, I'm going to leave that specialism to you,
Yeah.
Patrick Joyce of the parish, because it's, the trouble is, as a bystander, it's the same way that you're still going, through your mind, and there can't be women in
Yeah,
roles,
I
and there
agree with
can't be,
totally.
so
Totally.
it's tonal, sort of
Yeah.
differences. But then, with the billion plus, what was it, 1.5 billion? I don't
Oh,
know, huge number of people affected by that tone, then fair enough that,
yeah.
that is certainly a
And I
good
and I
a good
should I
thing.
should add to the whole discussion that I have not darkened the door of a Catholic church for Mass or communion. I've not made my Easter duties and putting it that way for I think 40 years. So, but again, it's that whole thing, and it did surprise me to go back to it. Quite how much of a hold it still had over me in terms of the interest in it and the emotion that rose up in me with it. So, yeah, quite a surprising one.
Mm.
And
Well, a little emotion for me, actually. I went to see a brilliant play in the Lyceum, Kelly. It's spelled
uh-huh.
Keli. It's a pretty kind of, well, it's pretty much a brass band. It's a young lassie, 17-year-old. She plays the tenor horn. She's got a rubbish job in a supermarket. Her mother is mentally ill. She's got a solo spot in this brass band. She can hardly keep the whole plates running. The actress who played her, Lassie Liberty Black, unbelievable performance, totally sweary from beginning to end. And I mean, really racketed out at a rate of knots. It just brings back so many. Well, it's so resonant of a different reality than the one that's normally on a stage in the National Theatre. It's a National Theatre of Scotland production. So, at the end, actually, not to spoil it, well, I have now, an actual brass band comes on the stage. And when that bit does, in all the sort of the drama that's happened up till then, you understand so much about what goes into the achievement of just making this sound together, that when it actually comes on and it's real humans that are standing on the stage, it is utterly emotional. And there's one line that the lassie says at one point towards the end, where she's talking about why people in working class communities, ex-mining communities, which this one is, put so much time and effort into music. And I mean, I'm paraphrasing this wrongly because I just heard it was, just a momentary line. But she's basically saying, you have no power to make anything happen. You've got no power over your community. You can't make a mine open. You can't make things be better. You can't make yourself be employed. You can't make problems go away, but you can make music together, and that you actually are creating something. It's such an important outlet for the creativity that's in everyone, that could find so many outlets if we were in a
Yeah.
different kind of world. But it really struck me, different conception of what manufacturing, that sounds antiseptic or rather remote and abstract and very lumpy, concretey and sort of machine driven. But this is about the manufacture together of something beautiful that you can all be part of. So I'd really, really highly recommend it. You just need to be ready for the sweariness, but it was a tremendous, tremendous piece.
Well, it's an interesting one, that, because one of my favourite movies is Brassed Off, which does actually take that premise of the closure and a brass band taking part in competition. And there's a new French movie out that I'm going to go and see called The Marching Band, which again is focused with a brass band in a French community suffering deindustrialization. So it's an interesting one, that you see that way that cuts through that making of music and that giving of meaning and that cultural significance of it within working class communities. And anyway,
Well,
so yeah,
but and
so
just to say, it is touring around till the 14th of June, so
I
I'd be
think it's
surprised if it
yeah,
must be coming to Dundee at some
I
point.
think
So
it's
there
coming
you go.
to. I think it's coming to Dundee, and I was a way to say, and we'll see you next week, chums. But we won't, because I was going Eton Orcadia. The Riddick will be next week.
Yes, indeedy. Well, in fact, I'm going off tomorrow
All right.
to the Orkney Folk Festival, which is one of my regular, things to do. En route, doing quite a number of things, including visiting a very aging aunt in Wick when I can get that far up the road. But anyway, I'll be there actually, and then coming back on Tuesday and trying to get a ferry and running for the ferry and queuing in it and all that stuff. And much as I'm quite game for trying to do ludicrous things to keep this
Oh
podcast
yeah.
going, the idea of trying to find broadband on a ferry that doesn't have it, rumbling across the Pentland Firth in what will inevitably by then be the howling gale we've all been waiting for.
Yeah.
I think possibly not. I should say that day, the 27th, there is a showing of the Denmark film in Tain in the Duthick Centre. All the info's on the website, lesleyriddick.com/events. So do come along if you want to see it. But anyway, it ain't going to work. So, and it's as if we actually planned this, and we so
Yes.
totally didn't actually. But anyway, we did do a special podcast yesterday, which will hopefully fill the gap somewhat with Dave Pearson and Rhys Stanwyck. Sure, I've mispronounced that surname, but anyway, these are two guys who are energy experts, and we basically were trying to make sense of what the heck is going on that leaves us so energy rich, but sort of, power poor in Scotland. And it's, I think, quite an interesting listen.
Oh
So
yes.
that will be the offering, and we will be back the following week.
Or on that
If we're
bullshit.
spared. If we're
It's,
spared.
I was away to say, DV, Deo Valente, which they say you can take the boy to the church, but you can't take church out the boy. And we'll see you next week, chums. Kind of.